Hi everyone, welcome to this session, evaluating the effectiveness of grievance mechanisms, insights from the Amader Kotha Helpline in Bangladesh's RMG sector. Thank you for all of you who are attending. We're just going to give it a minute or so. I can see that many people filtering through to the session. So we'll give it another minute or so to allow those attending to just come into the session. Whilst people are flowing through, great if you could, in the chat section, maybe just put your name, organization you're from, where you're joining us, as well as the others can see who's attending. If you would like, no requirement to do so, but the chat function is there. Whilst we just give it another minute before we get started. There's a few more people still flowing through. Okay, I feel like we've got enough, or we've got quite a few number of people already in attendance, and I know that a lot more people are flowing through, but in the interest of time, I think we're going to get started on this session. So a warm welcome to everyone, wherever you're joining from. It's a pleasure to have you all on this call, and thank you for making the time. If it's late in Asia or early in the morning in the Americas and all the time zones in between, really appreciate you joining us for this session and the last week of the OECD forum. So I'm going to get started. So you can see on the screen just a quick overview of the content we're going to cover today. So overview of the Amader Kotha Helpline, this independent GM, why this assessing effectiveness of GMs is critical. We'll talk about our approach and learning, about what this whole session is about, and have some speakers' insights and reflections on this process. There'll be some time for Q&A at the end. So housekeeping rules is some, we'll have hopefully about 10 to 15 minutes for sort of a Q&A at the end of the presentation and the speaking points from us as the presenters. You will see a chat function and a Q&A function. For those of you putting your names and the organizations and where you're from, leave that in the chat. If you have specific questions, please feel free to put that in the Q&A section at the top of the bar. So on your screen, you'll see a specific Q&A function. We really welcome questions. Please feel free to put those questions into the Q&A section specifically, and a number of my colleagues from Primark will be able to hopefully answer some questions as we go along. And if we're not unable to answer some of those questions, we'll try to come back at the very end as well, because we do want to leave like a specific section for Q&A. So again, we really welcome and encourage questions. So please put them into the Q&A section at the specific function at the top. This session is being recorded. And the recording will be made available after the session, and you'll have access to the slides and content of all the recording as well. So that's That's the overview and house rules out of the way. So without further ado, I think we're going to get started in the interest of time. Um, so what is this session about? So I really want to just highlight four things from our part. This session is, of course, about looking at how do we know if grievance mechanisms are truly working for workers and what does it take to strengthen them? Really about unpacking that key word, effectiveness. What does this mean? How do we unpack this and how do we understand that? And this is about this piece of work that us as the partners have been doing, and I'll explain who they are in just a minute, and really looking at that. That's the purpose of this session. I really also want to highlight the partnership, the long-running partnership that we, Primark, as a brand, have had with the Amader Kotha Helpline in the Bangladesh RMG sector for a long time, as have many other brands who are part of this too. As part of that long-running partnership, we've really taken the time as well to work with the Amader Kotha Helpline, but also this specific collaboration, which is between us, Primark, the Amader Kotha Helpline partners, and the Remedy Project, who are independent experts on grievance mechanisms. And I think the thing that I really want to highlight is this co-creation and collaboration and to evaluating the Amader Kotha Helpline through the specific lens of the UNGP criteria, which we'll get into. And lastly, that this whole piece of work that we're going to give you a glimpse into has really been learning focused. We're still in the process of the final stages of the analysis, but all of this work has really been through the lens of what can we learn, how do we understand what effectiveness means, and together, step by step, as partners, really unpack every step of the way what we're learning. So for the interest of time, I'll introduce the speakers, as we've got quite a bit of content to get to. Just as way of introductions, my name is Vishal Gadvi. I'm the Senior Manager for Social Impact Measurement at Primark in the Ethical Trade team. My colleague Nilanjana, she's the Senior Manager for Solutions. So this is all the work around programs and initiatives and partnerships that we have supporting human rights due diligence and improving worker welfare and outcomes for workers in the supply chain in Bangladesh. And she works very closely on all of our programs with her team on the programs and initiatives that we have, including the work around effective GMs and the partnership with Amader Kotha. The Amader Kotha Helpline themselves is this tripartite partnership between Phulki, the Cahn Group, and LRQA. So you'll hear from each of Phulki, the Cahn Group, from Humaira, Doug, and Mac, respectively, over the course of this session as well. And lastly, the Remedy Project. You'll hear from Archana Kotecha, the co-founder, or the founder rather, and the CEO of the Remedy Project. This is an organization dedicated to supporting workers in the supply chain, and they specifically focus on grievance mechanisms and remedy. So just to start the context of this collaboration, I just wanted to lay out Primark's social impact work. So our human rights due diligence, of course, includes all the work around risk assessments and audits, but our human rights due diligence approach, HRDD, goes beyond just audits. It includes all of the work, programs and initiatives that we have supporting workers in the supply chain on specific salient risks, and in really engaging deeply with rights holders and stakeholders. And it's really so much of this work is really about prevention of these risks before they manifest. And a sub part of that work includes the work that we do to support operational GMs, so factory zone GMs. So we recognize that that workers should use the internal GMs as a first port of call, and that issues should be resolved between employer and employee and resolved internally before raising these elsewhere. But we recognize that workers should also have an alternative means to raise grievances and have these addressed, and hence why we support third-party GMs. And in the context of the Bangladesh RMG sector for Primark, this is the Amader Kotha Helpline, and we'll get into what that is in just a minute. And lastly, I want to highlight within Primark, we invest really heavily in social impact measurement. This is monitoring and evaluation by another name for some people, but this is all about, yes, accountability, proving what works, what doesn't, to keep others accountable, but primarily ourselves accountable. But it's also about the learning. This is about, well, how do we understand the change, the outcomes, and the impact of all the work that we do to then improve and drive that continuous improvement through evidence-based learning. And situated under all of that is our work to understand the effectiveness of Amader Kotha by evaluating it. And again, I want to really highlight here the co-creation to this approach that we'll get into in the course of this presentation. So that's the context, and I'll now hand over to the Amader Kotha Helpline partner, and you'll hear firstly from Doug from his side. So over to you, Doug.
Thanks, Vishal. Appreciate the overview and the opportunity to be a part of this side session today. The Amader Kotha means our voice in Bangla, and the Amader Kotha Helpline was born out of the 2013 Rana Plaza tragedy. It was understood then that workers needed to have a voice in order to report to responsible authorities the things that they were seeing, that they were hearing, and that were all too often ignored. And so, first as a project of the Alliance, and then independently in 2018, we created an opportunity for workers to be trained to understand who we are and what we do with information provided to us, and then seek solutions to their problems. We are a consortium or partnership of three entities. LRQA is our tech partner. They are the back end. They help with data management, data analytics, strategy, and so much more. And we'll hear from Mac No in a minute. The Cahn Group, represented by myself, helps maintain the protocols. I help with communications and with project management, visiting Bangladesh periodically. And Phulki is the face of the initiative in Bangladesh. Phulki is a long-standing and highly respected NGO. You can see the photograph of the helpline operators there, and you'll hear more from the Director of Operations for the helpline in Bangladesh, Humaira Rahman, in just a moment. So we operate together. Our clients or our subscribers include Nirupon, which is itself a consortium of 70 brands and retailers. We have many European brands, of course, Primark among them. And so we service over 1 million workers in hundreds of factories in the RMG sector in Bangladesh every day. So with that brief introduction, we wanted to give the opportunity to Phulki to explain how the helpline works.
Thanks, Doug. Hello, everyone. I am Humaira Rahman, the country director of Amader Kotha Helpline in Bangladesh. My organization name is Phulki. Phulki is a pioneer organization in Bangladesh for the daycare center and childcare center. Phulki actually is the implementation partner of Amader Kotha Helpline. We work for the disadvantaged women and children in Bangladesh. We provided different type of trainings like caregiver trainings, caregiver supervision training, anti-harassment training, and also work for the enhance the policy level, also work in the policy level to enhance the women's right, and work for the sustainable development programs. I'm in charge of Amader Kotha Helpline since 2014. My main responsibility in this project to train and oversee the day-to-day operation with a team of 10 operators. Our live operators receive calls from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday to Thursday, and rest of the time, the night shift and weekend and government holidays, our call recording service is activated. 16 hours, our live operators receive the calls, and rest of the time, all call recorded, and after next working hour, our operators call back those numbers, the recorded numbers, and they reach all the callers. Thus, we support 100% call and reach 100% callers of Amader Kotha Helpline. Before we implementing this project in the factories, we conducted training to the 100% workforce of the factory. We distributed promotional materials, distributed our helpline card with our toll-free number. Our toll-free number is 0800-666-6666. We distribute this card, and we have our promotional material poster. We distributed them to the factories so that workers can our number whenever they need. Worker have to put this helpline card behind their ID card, factory ID card, so that they have access this number anytime they require it. After the training, we started receiving the phone calls. When we receive any call, we categorize them as per our protocol. We have a strong protocol. So we follow that protocol call by case. So when you receive any call, we categorize them as per protocol. We have 3 levels based on the priority of the case: high level, medium level, and low level. After receiving the call, we shared the case with the factory management for further verification and investigation. Factory management start the remediation plan after receiving complaint from us, and they share with us the remediation plan. We share the remediation plan with our caller and cross-check with them and take the update of the call status, case status. Thus, actually continue follow up the case with the factory management and the caller until the problem is resolved. We never ever disclose caller's identity to the factory management. We always handle case anonymously, but there are a few cases that actually we need to disclose caller's identity because they're very personal issues. So to work on such type of cases, we need to disclose their identity. We ask the caller their consent. If they agree to disclose identity, we share with the factory. But if they disagree, in that case, we share the factory management number with the caller. In such a way, actually, we introduce the caller with the factory internal communication channel. When we receive any high-level cases or any safety cases, we send email notification to our customer and brands within 24 to 48 hours. Amader Kotha actually works as a bridge for the factory management, worker, and brand. And we support to ensure a long-term business sustainable relationship in the industry. Amader Kotha reduce brands audit to support the grievance handling directly, and also introduce the workers with the internal communication channel, and thus we strengthen the factory internal communication channel process in the factory. Amader Kotha of all Phulki operators are female, so females are very comfortable to share the report to us, and that actually increase the female participation and also reduce the gender-based violence. I must say that from female participation increased in Amader Kotha Helpline 14% to 45% by 2025. Every month we share a monthly report to our customers and brands. LRQA is our reporting partner who is responsible to distribute the report. And now I would like to hand over my presentation to Mac from LRQA, who will explain you the detailed reporting process of Amader Kotha Helpline.
Great. Thanks so much, Humaira. So yeah, as mentioned by both Doug and Humaira, what we kind of do on the LRQA side, among other things, is, we kind of support on the technical backstopping for the helpline. So that includes sort of maintenance of the case management system, support Doug and colleagues on kind of the grievance protocol updates, and then kind of what I want to speak to you about, which is all the data backend. So this slide here in front of you, that sort of highlights, it's I suppose a bit of just a snapshot of the types of data insights which you can kind of extract from the hard work that's done by Humaira and her team. One kind of important note on this slide is that this is very much just an overview of all helpline data. What you see is definitely not Primark specific, because I'm sure Vishal wouldn't appreciate that. But at the top, what we're looking at is really just the headline figures on the helplines reach and coverage. So, for example, since 2014, we've reached over 800 factories, covering something like 1.5 million workers all the way back to 2014. So, just one interesting, important measure of kind of reach, coverage, and impact. But sort of beyond those top line figures, what's probably most interesting to our clients is sort of the specific insights on supplier risks, and maybe as well the sort of overall helpline effectiveness, which is sort of the bottom half of that slide. So that covers a 1-year snapshot just for illustrative purposes. Again, this is not Primark specific, but we're always seeking to understand risk trends, hotspots. So this is just on the left hand, the bottom left there. This is just an example of key types of issues that are raised according to risk level, right? So kind of lower risk end, we can expect to see a lot of compensation issues, termination, etc. Getting towards higher risk, it's the usual suspects in terms of physical abuse, safety types issues, etc. Obviously, the full data set's quite detailed. One interesting thing I think is worth calling out, and Humaira mentioned this, is that I think caller profile is very interesting to look at over time. So we do have kind of data on age and gender. It's important just to understand sort of the demographics of the helpline. You know, there's kind of an indication of trust there, especially in relation to sensitive issues, as Humaira said, on gender-based violence and harassment, among others. And then finally, kind of on the bottom right, again mentioned by Humaira, willingness to share personal information is quite an interesting one in terms of just a bit of a proxy on trust. So, you know, how many callers are willing to share their identity with the helpline versus how many are actually willing to share it with factory management. And that's something that we like to see over time. And it's an interesting kind of indicator of trust and ultimately effectiveness. So that's really the whistle stop tour. There's, you know, so much more we could talk about in terms of what's captured and how we can kind of slice it and analyze it. Happy to answer any questions as they come through via the chat or otherwise, but at this juncture, I think I'll hand back to Vishal, who's going to talk a little bit more about assessing effectiveness and why it's important.
Thanks, Mac. So on this section, so why is assessing the effectiveness of grievance mechanisms critical? I will hand over to Archana in just a moment, but before I do, from the brand perspective, I mean, many of the points that Archana will mention, not least the sort of legislative requirements, etc., for businesses like Primark, it's also really coming from this. As I've mentioned, we invest heavily in social impact measurement, so we want to understand the change in the outcomes, the impact of all of the work that we do to support workers in the supply chain, all you know, embedded in human rights due diligence. We take really seriously, you know, sort of the feedback and understanding this change, and we also see that as a way through which meaningful stakeholder engagement can happen. And ultimately, as I said, it's about the learning and the improvement. So how do we understand what works, what doesn't, so that we can ultimately support driving improvements and outcomes for workers. I think the point that I also want to make is the commitment from the very top. So the ex-CEO of Primark has visited the Phulki offices in Bangladesh, as has the general counsel of Associated British Foods, which is the parent company of Primark. So in the photo there, you see the general counsel, this is a couple of years ago, speaking to one of the operators in Bangladesh as part of their visit and really trying to understand, you know, more directly about, you know, how does the whole system work. And there is that buy-in and in recognition about this specific piece of work too, about really understanding the impact of all the work that we do, and especially this specific piece of work on understanding the effectiveness of GMs, with the focus on Amader Kotha for now. So with that, I'll hand over to Archana.
Thanks, Vishal, and thanks for having me on this panel. So as you know, ladies and gentlemen, remediation really sits at the heart of the human rights due diligence movement. And the ecosystem of remedy is one that comprises of multiple actors and multiple institutions. Within those, you'll find state-based actors and non-state-based actors. And within the non-state-based actors, the variety of grievance mechanisms is quite diverse. You have third-party funded, you have multi-stakeholder initiatives, but you also have operational level grievance mechanisms. And it is really important to understand a little bit what are essentially the dynamics, the relationships, the complementarity between these different mechanisms in order to truly understand how this ecosystem holds together. And within those, you have actors like rights holders, you have your factory operators, you have your trade unions and your brands, etc. So when looking at the effectiveness of a grievance mechanism, it's not simply the case of just looking at one ecosystem. It's actually multiple players and the interaction and how that generates the effectiveness of the approach. Now, we all know that in most of the legislation that's been coming down the pipeline, the requirement to have grievance mechanisms to make these accessible and also to provide effective remedy is there. And now with a lot of the sanctions focused legislation coming through, there is again an implicit understanding that remediation will be there and that various systems will be there to provide access to remedy. So a healthy grievance mechanism really is there as an early identifier of issues so that you can get to work in addressing and mitigating these risks. It's a place for engagement with workers and understanding their perspectives and building trust. Grievance mechanisms are empty unless they are clearly socialized with workers and they earn the trust of workers over time. And also, they need to have the intentionality of the operator to really make it work and to make it known and understood and shared with workers. And they also need to be able to enable a feedback loop. And the feedback loop essentially is the prevention part of remedy, which we often overlook. Remedy is not just about addressing harm that has been done. It's also about ensuring that the recurrence of the harm does not happen again. And that's, the piece where the learnings from the grievance mechanism are rolled back into the business to ensure that if any changes are required to policies and processes, that these take place. Next, please, Vishal. So why is assessing the effectiveness of grievance mechanisms critical? So we know that monitoring effectiveness is a very important part of human rights due diligence. And it is very important to be monitoring effectiveness of grievance mechanisms to ensure that you maintain the trust of workers and that the grievance mechanism is able to deliver the quality and of the outcome that is expected. Under international human rights law, there is an expectation that remedy will be adequate, it will be timely, and it will be effective. And therefore, this requires that the mechanism is effective. And continuous improvement, monitoring and evaluation of grievance mechanisms regularly and using the learnings to improve risk identification and management is also critical. And that ensures, that this is a dynamic process and that there is continuously monitoring of risk profile and an adequate response to it. And co-learning, engaging with stakeholders to understand the effectiveness and being transparent about good practices and challenges is also very critical. So, engagement with rights holders is something that is really fundamental. Engagement with trade unions as potential representatives of workers is also critical. And there is a richness that comes and a trust that is built from engagement with stakeholders, which is very hard to replace. But it also has a very strong bearing on the quality of remedy that is provided. Next, please, Vishal. So we all know that the UN Guiding Principles, Principle 31 in particular, the effectiveness criteria, set some parameters around which one can think about evaluation. What we did for this particular exercise was to really think about this as the floor rather than the ceiling. And we use these to really think through, what does the ecosystem as a whole look like? So we went beyond applying these criteria specifically to the Amader Kotha Helpline to really think about the ecosystem within which the Amader Kotha evolves. We thought about the dynamics between factory operational level grievance mechanisms, for example, and the Amader Kotha mechanism. And it was very important to us that we also focused a lot on the quality of remedy and on the outcomes. It wasn't just about access, ensuring that people were trusting, that it was easy enough for them to call. It was, and that they had a fairly predictable system to follow, but it was also equally critical to understand what was the quality of the engagement. What did engagement with rights holders look like? What was the staffing and what was the quality of services provided? And, it was very interesting because a lot of the different dimensions of the data also helped us to think through how people use and engage with the grievance mechanism at different time periods during political unrest, during the elections. What is the nature of the cases that are coming through and how they vary? So, all in all, it's been a very interesting exercise of really testing not just the Amader Kotha Helpline, but also stakeholders attached to the helpline and also the ecosystem within the helpline, within which the helpline evolves. Vishal, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Archana. So now we're going to talk about, well, what's been our approach and how we've gone about this learning piece. I think first of all, I want to really emphasize the focus of the evaluation context. So the specific context being the Bangladesh RMG sector, but more specifically the context of the ecosystem of remedy, as Archana mentioned. Props to the Oxfam Reckitt toolkit diagram. I think what that diagram I think is really helpful to understand. I think is just that there is different ways in which workers and rights holders can raise grievances to access remedy, non-state-based, state-based, etc. And that operational grievance mechanisms can include, of course, factory level's own grievance mechanisms, but also third-party grievance mechanisms like Amader Kotha. And that's the focus of the evaluation. We're specifically focusing on Amader Kotha in the Bangladeshi RMG sector within the context of the remedy, the ecosystem of remedy. And so the three broad evaluation questions that we have is, well, how effective is Amader Kotha using the UNGP framework, applying that in practice, what gaps exist, and what lessons can we together learn to support continuous improvement. And there's two other points that are really worth pointing out as well, that we understand and we know that remedy has to be thought of as both a process and as an outcome, and that understanding, we can't just look at Amader Kotha in isolation. We have to understand the effectiveness of Amader Kotha within the broader context of the remedy ecosystem. And we're still in the process of doing that in the analysis phase, but we recognize that we have to place the understanding of how Amader Kotha is effective or not, or within those two principles of remedy as a process and as an outcome, and then placing it within the wider context. We're cognizant of that, and that's part of the process that we're undertaking. And what else did we need to consider? Well, as Archana has explained, of course, you've got the UNGP criteria here. I think one of the points that we really very early on thought about is theory to practice. So we have the criteria, but then how do we want to go about applying this in practice? What does it mean to really look at legitimacy or predictability in all the sort of the messy detail that we'd want to look at? And that's what initially led to the co-creation piece with the Amader Kotha Helpline partnership. We worked with them very closely to understand, well, how do we go about doing this? And we know that Phulki, as Humaira has explained, has built up a lot of trust with workers over the many years that they've been operating. We don't want to, and absolutely we do not want to sort of upset that trust in any way whatsoever. And there are many sensitivities as well, of course, in terms of the sort of data that we'd want to gather and the feedback that we want to gather. So we really wanted to think about doing this practically and engaging with the Amader Kotha Helpline partners about how do we go about doing this together? How do we sensitively and sensibly go about tackling this, the question of effectiveness in a way that we can all learn from? And of course, that then led to questions around, well, who are the stakeholders and that we want to gain that feedback from. And the real key one, which I'll talk about in the next slide, is the complainants. So that is the rights holders, the workers who use Amader Kotha Helpline to raise a grievance and seek resolution. I'll come back to that really important point in a minute, but this is a really key point for us, that the complainants, the workers that use the helpline. Another key consideration for us was bringing some independent perspectives. So that's one of the reasons that we have the Remedy project, but also a couple of Bangladeshi monitoring and evaluation experts to help us do the interviews independently in Bangla in the language with the different stakeholders that we want to speak to. And we may, as a brand or the helpline, see the effectiveness of Amader Kotha from a particular light, but bringing in that independent lens and perspective and the expertise that the Remedy have really helps us to maybe see angles that we might miss, and together really learn by having an outside perspective on this partnership as well. So it's really key and important to us to have that independent lens and perspective on all of this work. And lastly, as I've mentioned this before, but balancing rigor and pragmatism, I think for me the real key point is starting from the point of practicality rather than the point of perfection, because there are so many sensitivities involved, not least how do we gain that feedback from complainants. We don't want to set ourselves a target from the beginning if we felt that, well, actually it's going to be quite difficult. There were many different ways that we discussed doing this, but we really wanted to do it sensibly. And so we really wanted to be, yes, as rigorous as possible in this entire approach, but also be pragmatic, start from the place of practicality, as I mentioned, rather than perfection. And of course, over time, build on that. And looking forward as well, others could hope, and we ourselves will learn from this to then build on that. And lastly, to the point that Archana mentioned too, I won't read out that line, but it comes from the interpretive guide on applying the effectiveness lens from the UN, And as Arjun mentioned, the effectiveness criteria is really meant to be a floor and not a ceiling. And I think what really stands out is that by applying this framework in reality and learning from the experience of applying it and the lessons that would come out of it, to then build out from that collectively, us that are applying it, but also to the wider industry. And so that for us has also been another principle that we've considered, which is how do we contribute to the wider knowledge and understanding about effectiveness as the framework, the UNGP criteria, but also in terms of how we're understanding the effectiveness of GMs in whichever context we're applying this to, and what are the learnings from that. So as Archana mentioned, as the guideline says, this is a floor and not a ceiling, and we want to build from that. So it's an important principle to recognize. So then what's been our approach? Well, our approach has really come in 4 phases, and it's important for me to stress here that we're still, as the collaboration between us, in that 4th and final phase of this piece, and this opportunity is really to take you through how we've gone through what we've gone through and what have been the steps. So, after discussing, of course, what's been the approach, co-creating that with the Amader Kotha Helpline and the Remedy project, we did an initial stage of data gathering, and we initially started with some document review of the protocols that are already there, the protocols of escalating cases, the case management and the processes, etc., to then lead into key informant interviews. Those key informant interviews have largely been with the senior leaders of the Amader Kotha Helpline, but also us as Primark. So Nilanjana, who you'll hear from shortly as well, and her team. How do they, when the cases are escalated up to us, how does the protocol work in practice? What's the actual experience? And really understanding how does the theory and the writings of the protocol meet reality, and really hearing from all of us in terms of the responses and how we're acting on that. That was the first key piece of data gathering. And then the next piece of data gathering has been feedback from in focus group discussions with the operators of Amader Kotha Helpline themselves. You saw that picture earlier that Doug presented of some of the operators, and we really wanted to hear from them. How do they speak to workers? What are there common issues that come up, etc.? And of course, we're not here to get names and really get into lots of detailed specific cases, but we really want to understand these are the operators that complainants talk to. So how does it work in reality? What can we understand from them? And after that, we then took a pause and we stopped and we did a session on co-learning together. Well, what are we understanding at this point in time as part of our interim findings? And so together in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, we together came together, us as the collaboration, to really unpack, to corroborate, to validate, to synthesize, and really sense check together. At this point in time, what do we understand? Is this making sense? Are we missing anything? Have we got anything wrong? Are what we're finding so far make sense? Are we all on the same page? I think that was a really important piece of work for us to do, to really be on the same page before then going to the 3rd stage, which is the most important stage for us, which is the complainant data collection feedback phase. Now, applying the effectiveness criteria couldn't really be considered legitimate if you don't include the voices and the feedback of the rights holders themselves into the process of the complainants and their experiences. But how do you do this in a way that respects confidentiality, anonymity, and doesn't undermine the trust that's been built up by particularly Phulki over time with workers in the RMG context in Bangladesh? And so this was a really sensitive point. I mean, there were many options that we thought about, but we, again, balancing rigor and practicality. How do we do this sensibly to respect all of those points I mentioned? So we created a confidentiality protocol about the steps that were needed to engage with complainants. So Phulki have a database of all the calls received, which we as a brand do not have access to. But we work with them as a first point to understand what types of calls we perhaps want to look at and understand, so that we could then create a list of potential complainants to call. The confidentiality protocol itself also spells out that Phulki will call the possible complainants for interview, and since they already have that trust built in, workers know who they are when they're calling up, to explain the purpose of this work, to gain the consent, etc., and then ultimately to then connect them to our independent monitoring and evaluation expert, who's then connected directly to that complainant after after that process to then do that to conduct the interview. And that interview guideline was developed again together with someone from Phulki on the call, so that in case there's any issues, etc., that the operator would be there to help quell any or answer any questions if there was anything that wasn't understood. But ultimately, the interview being conducted by an independent interviewer. And then all of that data is, of course, collected, but we as the brand, we do not have access to the names of the callers or the factories, etc. But we have the transcripts of together of all the feedback, and that's been the most important thing. So that's the way in which we went about collecting the complainant feedback, which has been a really, really important piece of this work. As I mentioned, one of the most critical stages that we really wanted to do sensitively, which has been a real key piece about doing this practically. So lastly, we are in the final phase of analysis, and then we want to conduct another workshop together to then unpack the full list of findings and the so what question, which is what do we do from this together as the partnership. So this will involve a round of triangulation, corroboration, validation, and unpacking those questions and insights together, but also then developing out rubrics from which we then measure and apply the effectiveness, kind of analysis effectively from all of the data that we've gathered to this point, and then ultimately, hopefully, some recommendations that we together can then unpack about what this then means in terms of improvements and things that can be adjusted, etc. So that's the process. And I'll now hand over to Archana, who will then facilitate a discussion between Nilanjana and Humaira on sort of the early insights into the process, as well as some reflections. So over to you, Archana.
Thanks, Vishal. If we could have the next slide, please. So we just wanted to share with you, and this will form the basis of the discussion with Humaira and Nilanjana, some very initial insights of the themes emerging from the study. As Vishal mentioned, we are still working our way through the process. We have gone through this fairly organically, and we've taken the time it needed to be able to elicit the right information from the right stakeholders. So it won't surprise you, just very briefly going over these, that it wouldn't surprise you that rights holder trust and awareness is absolutely critical to the uptake of the grievance mechanism. In terms of barriers to accessing remedy, retaliation exists. It's there, and there are ways in which protocols can be put in place to minimize retaliation risk, including 24/7 availability, and of course the option for complainants to stay anonymous, which is available. If you recall from some of the data that Max shared, actually there's a high level of trust with many complainants choosing to share their details in some cases. Collaboration and shared responsibility, there Amader Kotha serves as an interface, and it is an alternative channel to that of a factory grievance mechanism. A lot of the way that it works is in collaboration with factories and with the brands as well. The grievance resolution is driven primarily by factory management, and reporting an escalation to brands happens in cases where that are more complex or where the brand intervention is required, and it also allows visibility and can prompt resolution much faster as well. Resources and expertise. All Phulki operators had the time to speak with them, to understand from their perspective what sort of training they undergo on the job, and beyond that, their understanding of labor rights issues. And historically, I think there has been such an emphasis because of the legacy out of which the Amader Kotha Helpline was born out of, on health and safety issues. And there is now a growing recognition that given challenges around gender-based violence and harassment cases, struggling to make their way through grievance mechanisms, that there is value in having expertise in that area too. Remedy, in terms of the corrective remedial actions, there's been a lot of payment of overdue wages, disciplinary action in some cases against wrongdoers, etc. One of the things to explore going forward is to really think about forward-looking preventive measures, and also potentially post-remedy monitoring, all of which add to the wealth of the process and the sustainability of the remedy as well. And the rights holder engagement, operators check with workers to confirm that issues are resolved, and then there is a follow-up again 7 days later. to explore engagement with workers during the determination of outcomes. This is absolutely critical in order to ensure that the remedies are appropriate and effective from the rights holders' perspective. And, Humaira, we had a chance to talk about some of these insights during our workshop in Dhaka. And I just wondered if I could invite you to share some reflections on, what did you think of these? Were any of these a surprise at all?
Thank you, Archana. Thank you so much. Actually, the workshop that held in Dhaka last year was very helpful for Phulki. We understand that was a very preliminary stage and early stage to share the findings, but it helps us to step back and think more about our work in a broader, bigger context of the RMG sector of Bangladesh. We understand the different parts of the parts of the evaluation process and how they will work together and find out our impact. We are not actually surprised with the findings because we know that training is very essential for the workers' awareness and trust. And we also know that close collaboration between all stakeholders is very important to ensure effective grievance channel. So actually, it was very helpful for us to understand the overall process of the evaluation. So it was helpful for the Phulki. Yeah.
Thanks, Humaira. And Nilanjana, I wondered if you could perhaps add from a brand's perspective, what are your reflections on these initial findings?
Yeah, initial findings, yes, from the brand's perspective, I can add that this was not very surprising. We are very much involved in the process as a brand partner here in the operation level, and all these stakeholders to resolve issues or remediation, we are very much involved in. So we know that, but it also gives us a kind of like a bird view to see, yes, what works and what not works, and where the improvement areas are there, and the recommendations came out from this are very much kind of like reasonable, feasible. So I think that's kind of like we all accept it very positively.
Thanks, Nilanjana. And Vishal, maybe we could move to the next slide. I mean, Vishal, you emphasized throughout this presentation that, we worked really hard at ensuring that there was co-creation, co-learning at every step of the way. And from the workshop in Dhaka all the way through to working through some of the challenges in terms of data collection, engagement with complainants, etc. This has really been, I must say, a labor of co-creation and a labor of love, to say the least. And given that co-creation has been at the heart of this process from the beginning, Humaira, may I perhaps ask, some of your thoughts around what were your concerns about this co-learning and co-creation process, and how did you address some of these?
Thank you, Archana. Actually, at the beginning, we had so many concerns that what is the purpose of this evaluation and how much time it will take for Phulki, how might it affect the trust of the worker, factory, and the brands? What would be our partners' involvement for LRQA and the Cahn Group, and whether the findings will be practical and within our ability to act on or not? So that was a very concern from the very beginning. But actually, I'm very thankful to the MED team and the Primark. They actually encourage our active involvement from the very beginning during designing the process. So we discussed with our partner also, and they're also comfortable with the process. So we sit together with the Primark several times, the MED team, and discuss about the approaches which will be accepted by all parties. And later it's actually addressed, and the Dhaka workshop actually initially addressed most of our concern. So after that workshop, we mostly clear about the overall process. So yeah, and yes, definitely there are some challenges. There are some challenges during this process because when we get to know that the the target group will be our caller who actually share with us their personal information, their confidential issues, and this particular group will be the target group for the evaluation. That was our main concern because we handle this anonymously. So if any third party, the evaluation team will call them and ask them about their issues and cases, they might be uncomfortable or confused. So that was a concern that actually how we'll work in this area. Then we sit with Primark, the remedy team, and our partners, and we decided a joint approach. And in that approach, actually, the Phulki Amader Kotha team will call the caller and introduce them the purpose of the evaluation process and the research project. So we explain them the purpose of the survey and then hand over that caller to the evaluation team. So thus, actually, we ensure the caller's trust and as well as we ensure the quality of the research.
Thanks, Humaira, for touching on, what was essentially something very important to every one of us who was part of this team, which was how do we safeguard complainants' confidentiality and their trust also. And there were multiple discussions, and we were able to finally come to a solution. And thanks for highlighting that. Nilanjan, I want to hear from your perspective. How did you find, these challenges, and how do you feel we navigated them together?
Thank you very much. Yes, the co-creation basically worked here very well, I would say, because all the party engaged were kind of like very much given time to talk, to brainstorm, to find out the best solution. As Humaira mentioned, that one of the hardest part of the survey was to engage the caller to see their satisfaction or kind of like hear from them. It was the most challenging part, and we gave I think it took us a long time to find out the solution, because we were thinking of different kind of solutions. We were thinking about the community survey, we were thinking about the factory survey, we were also thinking about online surveys, different ways. But the suspicions was that whether we will get a actual caller, whether they will be open with us with all those other ways. So we were really in a kind of like trouble to find out a good solution. And the trust and the confidentiality is the core. So we need to really uphold the trust of the worker and the confidentiality of their information. So that's why we use third party, as Vishal also mentioned, that in this process we use third party. But how could we get them? As Humaira mentioned, that finally we have chosen the way that, okay, we use Amader Kotha to kind of like call the caller who use Amader Kotha and explain them the purpose and get their consent, and then pass it to the third person, so that he can independent perspective, to bring independent perspective, he can continue with the survey. So this was the hardest part, and I would say that though it's take longer time, but we give time, we sit with everyone, several meeting we conducted and find out this way. And even after we find out this way, we try it as a pilot, so that it may not work or it may work. That was the option. So we open all these options, but fortunately that was kind of like worked, and kind of like we don't have to think more about to reach the worker. So this is an unique example of the co-creation of this journey of the kind of like the survey. I think it is very much kind of like work well.
Having been a part of this process alongside, everyone who's speaking on this call today, my key learning and my key takeaway from this was very much that open communication and transparency was critical. Everybody needed to understand who was coming from what perspective, what were their limitations and challenges, and why. And that was the only way in which we were able to come together and really think creatively around, how do we get past the hump of needing to protect complainants' confidentiality, but also acknowledging that their contribution to this effectiveness study was absolutely critical. And I guess, my final question for Humaira, perhaps I can come to you first, is what for you is the key ingredient for enabling collaboration and co-learning among stakeholders in this process? Nilanjana, maybe I'll come to you first while I give Humaira time to figure her mic out.
Yes. Yes. I think that I agree with Archana, you that positiveness, openness, and the confidence of the and the collaboration was the key enabler of this kind of like co-creation among the stakeholder. We work together. That was very much kind of like important. But beside that, I would say the interest or eagerness to really learn how effective the Amader Kotha is was also a big enabler, because from the starting of this discussion I have seen all these stakeholders were very much eager to know, yes, we are running, that means the Amader Kotha is running for a long time, more than 10 years, but the effectiveness study never done. So how basically it is effectiveness study should be done, number one, and number two, the improvement areas are kind of like well appreciated, well accepted, which make it basically the enable of this kind of like the survey, I think, main enabler of the survey.
And that's certainly how I felt when we shared the initial findings in Dhaka, and the response we got from the Phulki team was very much a very welcoming response to wanting to grow, to learn, and to evolve, most certainly. Humaira, back to you. What do you think was the key ingredient for enabling the collaboration?
Okay, the correlation and the collaboration with all stakeholders is very important to handle this type of cases. Actually, our focus to solve the cases from the very beginning, not the case-to-case solve. We would like to solve the cases so that it will not raise again in the factories. To take these type of steps, actually, we need to engage all parties very closely. Everybody has to maintain the responsibilities in their part very strongly, so that all cases, all issues from the factory should be solved from the very initial stage, not case to case. It's not our target. Our target to resolve the cases in overall the factories for overall the workers, not the particular any worker. So to solve this type of cases, we need to study more, we need to work together more, and every particular responsible stakeholder should do their duty and their responsibility on the proper way, so that we can get the support from all parties and able to support the workers in a broader way.
Thank you, Humaira. And I think that says it all around the ecosystem point and the fact that every stakeholder has a key role to play in this ecosystem. Vishal, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Archana. Thank you, Humaira and Nilanjana as well. So we have about 15 minutes or so for audience Q&A, and I know that some of you have had some issues in the Q&A. Apologies for that wasn't working, but being able to put it in the chat. And I know that colleagues of mine will be able to answer some of these questions, and some of them actually deserve a bit more unpacking, perhaps with other callers and other presenters on this call. There was one specific question, I think, from Hillary about when a report would be made available, etc. Just to quickly say that, as I've mentioned, we're still in the analysis phase. That the whole process of getting to the point of where we are at the moment, particularly that feedback from complainants, we've only just kind of almost really recently finished wrapping up, and there's a lot more process in terms of working together collaboratively in the way that's been described to really unpack that, and I think learn together initially about what this means. And then, of course, kind of hopefully would have something out there. So I would say just watch this space. There's nothing out there at the moment. And this purpose of this session is really to give you a glimpse of what we've been doing and are still in the process of doing. And we're quite toward the end part of this whole effectiveness piece, but there is more to come. So watch this space. So I will just stop sharing the screen at the moment. This is time for the Q&A, and I'm just going to pick out a couple of questions, and I see some questions here would be worth elaborating on. So I'll pick out another one here. Before I do, Lindsay, I see you've got your hand up. I wonder if you could unmute Lindsay. As you do that, I will read out one question here. This is, I believe, from Simone, and actually, this is a question perhaps for Nilanjana or yourself, Humaira, whoever feels comfortable, about how do we verify that an issue has been resolved? Is there a mechanism in place to log the issue or to check? Humaira, did you want to answer that?
Okay. Yes. When you receive any call, we ask the factory management to do the investigation, and we also double check with the caller to monitor the investigation level from the worker side. So after confirming from the both parties, factory management and worker, we decide that the case is resolved. Without the consent and without the confirmation from the victim or caller, we don't close any case.
Great, thank you. There's another question here, I think, from Somvi. Once work, and I believe it's been answered, but perhaps the team can, Neela and Jana, maybe you'll be able to best place to answer this as well. Once workers of a factory have begun using the GM, do you see a push out from the factory management and intimidation strategies internally?
Okay, basically the intimidation, fear of intimidation is always there because the worker are using the external grievance mechanism. But you know, from our side, the management are very much sensitized before we launch the Amader Kotha Helpline in the management in any factory. So management are very much sensitized, and they know, they are very much aware about the protocol of the helpline, and then they are aware that they are the one who needs to resolve the issue. So, and they also know, you know, that the issues are not reported to us as brand directly, but the issues are resolving through the helpline and the management interventions unless there are very serious cases. So we and also I would say that the worker orientation also is also one key part that which make them kind of like trusted to the helpline. And Amader Kotha Helpline is very common in Bangladesh. That's why kind of like many worker use this. So using that, seeing other worker using other worker helpline and getting the remedy also give them confidence. So that is how basically I think we covered this fear of retaliation. Yeah.
Thank you, Neil and Jana. Just going to pick up a few more questions here, and please feel free to keep the questions coming in the chat function as well. It's great to have this conversation and this dialogue. There's a question here. I think it was answered, but again, I think really great to hear more from the operational side. And maybe this is one for you, Humaira, which is: do you engage for training for the factory managers? Do you explain the case for listening to and resolving concerns raised?
Yes, we conducted training for the 100% workforce of the factory. So we had separate meeting with the factory management, top management, mid-level management. They also received training from us, and workers also received training from us. So throughout the training program, we explain them when they can call Amader Kotha, how they can call Amader Kotha, what is the case handling process, what is the management responsibility, how they will support us. So everything will explain them during the training program. It's a huge training program by the Amader Kotha team for the all workforce of the factory.
Thanks, Humaira. There's another question here, and I think I can answer this one. Muid, if it's the same Muid that I know, good question. How will you ensure that the survey responses are free from coaching or external influence? It's a good question. It's something that we discussed quite a bit, right? I mean, the answer is, of course, there's no way to get perfection here, and we really have to put in the steps and the protocols that we think are the most sensible, that are most likely to elicit honest responses. And I think key to that has been the confidentiality protocol and the steps in the process that I described earlier on in the presentation, particularly with connecting the Phulki operators up to our independent interviewer who'd conduct that conversation in Bangla. And if there's anything that I've learned over the many years of doing this type of work in social impact measurement, I think, you know, judging by the conversations that were had at the OECD forum this week around worker voice and genuine worker voice, is that it's not just about the questions that you ask, it's also about the way in which you ask the questions and the nature of that dialogue and the conversation that happens And we did pilot when we started doing this, there was a real conscious effort on let's hear the first 5 responses or so and just understand like the way in which the responses are coming through. And we felt confident after at that point that there was a genuine dialogue and openness that was happening between the interviewer and the complainants that are willing to speak to us. So whilst it's always difficult to have a perfectly influence-free potentially conversation, we've put in the steps in as much as possible. And I think really focusing on that human element of the conversation and the dialogues, and not just about extracting a response, but having that dialogue in the most genuine way possible. And I think that for us has been, and certainly from my perspective, has been really, really key. How do we do that? And again, start from the point of practicality rather than perfection, and learn along the way as we go. I think that's been a really, really important part of this entire piece. I believe we have about, roughly about 7 minutes for a few more questions. I will just pick out a couple more, and then I think we'll be finished. Okay, Sonvi's asked another question here. Oh, but there's a couple of good questions here. Is there an understanding or repercussions from the buyer if grievances stay unresolved, or of those of a kind keep repeating? We see a massive gap between commitment and real action, and some tough conversations have to ensue. Would love to learn from the Bangladesh experience. Does anyone from the team want to answer that? Perhaps Lindsay, you might want to answer that if you are actually able to come into the discussion.
Yeah, I think I can. Hi everyone, thanks. Just brilliant session. Just keeping it really brief. I think the short answer is this is where having this access to this GM is part of our overall approach and program in Bangladesh. So we have a really big team. We have close connections with the sourcing part of the business, the buying part of the business, and governance around all of that. And we have a social audit program and other partnerships, etc. So, the short answer is if something keeps repeating, if there's a problem, no, it won't just be left. And there'll be kind of various levels of escalation, which will be informed both by kind of Primark's global protocols and processes on this, but also the local team, using their judgment and relationships in terms of where they think they can make progress, how they can best make progress. But the bottom line is it doesn't pay for the brand to leave a recurring issue kind of festering away. So we're very motivated to close out issues as much as we can.
Thank you, Lindsay. There's another question here from Nahian. This is a really good question around leverage. And you're right to say that Primark, we do have comparatively strong level of leverage. And perhaps this is one for you, Nilanjana, about, I'll just quickly read out the point here. One recurring challenge I encounter is securing meaningful buy-in from supply chain partners in situations where the company's leverage is relatively limited. From my understanding, Primark appears to have a comparatively strong level of leverage with factories in Bangladesh. In context where leverage is indeed lower, I'd be interested to hear perspectives on practical strategies to encourage engagement and commitment from suppliers. So maybe you might want to reflect here on what you see from the suppliers in terms of working with us to resolve cases.
Yeah, basically we have seen that the supplier are working positively with us to resolve the cases, and sometime for some really high level or critical cases, we also involved as per the helpline protocol. Our intervention is also to see the quality of the remediation or quality of the investigation. We also involve. And as I mentioned that from the beginning, before we launch Amader Kotha in any factory, we sensitize the factory management about the protocol so that they also can take Amader Kotha as an grievance channel for their own, so that it also work as a early alert for the management to know the worker grievances and resolve it in the right time, so that it do not really make a big chaos or escalate to other level. So that positiveness among our supplier, our factory, we so far we have noticed.
Thanks, Nilanjana. We've got probably time for at least another 2 or 3 questions, and it's great that the questions keep coming through. This is a great question that just come from Anya, if I've pronounced your name correctly. I'm not sure I understand correctly, but I think you mentioned that only very serious cases are reported to the brand directly. What is considered as serious, and what steps are initiated once such cases reach the brand, and how is the brand making sure they're aware of all the other cases? So this is very much about the protocol here. So maybe Humaira and Nilanjana's question for both of you, really. Whoever wants, maybe Humaira, if you want to come in.
Thank you, Vishal. Actually, we have three levels I explained in my presentation: high level, medium level, and low level. So there are the few cases go to the high level, and that are the serious cases for us. We notify brand for these high level cases within 24 to 48 hours through email. This is an email notification for urgency. But we communicate with the factory management, ask them to do an investigation, management do investigation. If anything physical abuse or harassment cases, they go for the disciplinary procedure and share with us the disciplinary procedure documents. We double check with the caller, ask them the investigation status. Caller also share with us the status of the case, progress of the case, progress of the investigation. And for these high level 3 cases, we shared these cases to the brands for further on-site investigation. As you know, Amader Kotha don't go to the factory for any on-site investigation. But for this serious type of cases like sexual harassment, physical abuse, fire inside factory, beam crack, beam column crack, or exit block, IS block. So there are some cases actually on-site investigation is required. So that type of cases, we share all investigation report, all CAP that we receive from the factory management to the brand to go to the factory to do further on-site investigation. And parallelly, we continue our follow-up with the caller, the victim, and check the progress of the investigation over phone. But for on-site visit, on-site checking, we share this case to the brand for further support.
Nilanjana, I don't think there's anything to add. Do you want to add anything there?
No, basically, what Humaira said, that's the protocol we follow, and whenever any case escalated to us, we take it very seriously. And whatever the Amader Kotha Helpline of expectation to go and investigate, we kind of like extend our investigation inside the factory, so that the clarity of the remediation or clarity of the cases can come out. So our team is always, so here also I want to highlight that the shared responsibility or the kind of like collaborative work is very important to resolve issues.
Thanks, Nilanjana. I think we probably have time for just maybe a couple of more questions. It's really great that the questions are coming through now in the chat. There's a question here from Gabriella. Harassment issues are difficult to report and address. Are there examples of successful processes and solutions? Again, maybe Humaira or Nilanjana, you want to come in?
Yeah, harassment cases. We receive harassment cases, especially physical harassment cases. We regularly receive this case, and this is not very challenging for us to handle because victim directly call us and share the incident. So they are very open to us, the victim, and we talk to the factory management. They did the investigation, and we received the investigation report. So for the physical abuse, when the victim directly call us, that is very helpful for us, and that is not challenging for us. But yes, sometimes for the sexual harassment cases, it's challenging because sometimes victim doesn't want to disclose their identity. But we receive several calls. There is Doug will explain that we have a safer together approach. That will explain you. For that approach, actually, we give chances to the other workers to call us so that we can get more than one call for any issue, and we can report to the factory management anonymously. I'd like to hand over Doug to explain more about the Safer Together option, how we handle these harassment cases to the Safer Together program.
Yeah, thanks, Huma. We know that gender-based violence issues, as examples, are underreported. We don't have statistics on it. It's impossible to have. But we know in general that it is a problem throughout the RMG sector in Bangladesh, and it's underreported. So we've engaged in what Humaira refers accurately as a Safer Together initiative. It's an academic research study to determine or test whether if you provide workers the opportunity to escalate their case to factories only if there are 5 or more others with a similar situation in a similar part of the factory, then their names will be will better be protected for anonymity. So in short, it's a way of protecting anonymity and giving workers more confidence that on these highly sensitive issues, they can report it and it won't actually reach management with all that fear of retaliation until there's enough other people who face the same risk that they'll be held in confidence and not be able to be retaliated against. This is a 1.5-year study. The research has been concluded. We don't yet have the results. It's going through analysis, and we'll learn whether this concept of escrow reporting is legitimate, if it works in the sector, or not, and we'll apply escrow reporting as it makes sense after we get it. But it's a really important issue, and we're trying to learn more.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for all your questions. I know there were some questions we didn't get a chance to come to. Actually, a few really good questions that I really want to answer, but I'll perhaps answer that separately. So I just wanted to say thank you for joining. We're at time now. Just the last things to say is that the final evaluation report will be coming soon, so do watch this space, and please feel free to reach out to any of us if you want to understand a bit more, get a bit more insight, perhaps. More than happy to answer your questions. So thank you for taking your time, and we hope to connect with you again soon. Take care.